What is up, everybody? Welcome into Tom Curran's Patriots Talk podcast, joined as always by the Senator Phil Perry. Phil is boots on the ground in Las Vegas. We got a ton to get to, so don't move.
It's time, world champion, and there ain't nothing you can do about it.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we have a chase, and we are going to cut to it right now. Phil Perry, we didn't send you out to Vegas to just sightsee, swim, swelter in the desert, and make a couple grand and go to shows. We sent you out there to find out what's going on. Day one of joint practices Tuesday, they weren't so flipping good. Tell me about the 2 days overall, your main takeaway.
My main takeaway from the 2 days is that this offense showed signs of life. It showed signs of real progress. There are still issues, I would say primarily along the offensive line. But for them to string together the very end of day one, where they lit it up in the 2-minute, and I would say about 80% of the practice on day two, that to me is progress, Tom, to be able to have consecutive practices that you can take something away from and that you can really be over the top exuberant about, which is what this Patriots offense was yesterday. You could sit there and say, it's just a practice. Why are they getting so excited? But they needed a little enthusiasm. They needed a little juice. They needed a little emotion. We have not seen that stuff from them really since day one of camp. We haven't seen it since the pads have come on. Mm-hmm. So that to me tells me that they're feeling a little bit better about where they are and that they've actually built something over the course of this summer. Now they just have to see if they can sustain it.
How vital is Mac Jones to the fact that they showed some resilience on day two? I know on day one, you reported on it. Numbers-wise, not great. Also threw a pick and paced restlessly on the sidelines after that. And then they come back yesterday, and he had a very good performance. And you mentioned this as we talked about it last night on an early edition. This is kind of his MO. If he plays like ass, he doesn't stay there. He usually bounces back. And even though he's in his second year, and I know quarterbacks are like this anyway, but it's pretty clear he's the second most important person in this franchise right now.
I would say there's no question. And I would say he already has really taken to this leadership role that he's in. And he has been in it by default since his rookie season. But that's the one area where I would say we have seen real growth. I think it's hard to point to at times real growth on the field because he hasn't had time to throw. The running game's been a mess. The communication with the receivers hasn't always been there. But you can see him trying to set a tone. And that happened on day two of these joint practices because when he throws a touchdown pass, it's not ho-hum, fist pump, back to the huddle. It's no, I'm going to seek this guy out. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to try to create, I'm going to try to manufacture a little bit of energy here. And I don't think it was forced, but I do think he was trying to manufacture something there and say, hey guys, it's okay to have some fun with this. Let's show that we're happy with ourselves in a competitive situation like this. And I think they needed those moments. And every time he threw a touchdown pass, twice to Jacoby Myers, Ty Montgomery, and the game winner to Hunter Henry at the end of day two, he's the first one making the beeline to that receiver that scored the touchdown, and it generated this team-wide celebration a couple different times. So he's already, to me, he's grown leaps and bounds as a leader in year two.
I loved his answer because, you know, he has such a droning voice. And his podium persona is not really compelling. As enjoyable as he is to his teammates and as enjoyable as he is to talk to, he's still growing into it. But he had a comment on WEEI about the process and failure. And John Henry's going to find that for us and just play it because I thought it was really perceptive. Someone asked him about failure, and he said, well, failure presumes a finished product, and we're not. John, if you can find that, just throw this up right now.
Is failure on the practice field, joint practice field, preseason game field, is failure a part of that process that you can accept as the quarterback of this team?
Yeah, I think that failure is putting a label on something that's not the process. So, like you just said, we're just trying to focus on the process and not the result. And failure would be considered a result. So we're just trying to work through it all. And like you said, it's just doing the basic things better, and we can all do that. I can do that better. Just get the ball to the open guy and carry on to the next play. I think sometimes, we don't need to overcomplicate it. It's football, and it's a simple game if you make it a simple game. So we're all trying to get there. It doesn't happen overnight, and we're making good progress. So that's all you can ask for.
That struck me as being really, and again, he's certainly not a dummy, but it's just such a deft response to an ongoing scrutiny of, you guys are really shitty right now. You're probably going to be shitty this year, huh? And he had a ready answer for it.
Yeah, and I think it gets back to that quality that, I talked about this on Next Paths yesterday, but we talked about it a little bit on Early Edition too. There is a grit to Mac Jones, a firmness of mind and spirit. That's the dictionary definition. Perseverance in general. And I think when he's going through this process, and it sucks for him and his offensive teammates at times, not only the product on the field, but the process of learning a new system and learning a new offense and dealing with new coaches, there is this end goal in mind and this resolute approach of, bleep this, I'm going to make this work, whether he's happy about it or not. And so I think he does have a good big picture point of view when it comes to what this team is going through now. Now, how much have they been hammering that behind the scenes, Tom? And how much of that is Mac Jones on his own? I don't know, but I would think behind the scenes, the message from Bill Belichick and others has been, we're going to get this right. We're going to figure this out. Just stick with it. I promise this is what's best for us right now.
I'm going to veer real quick and ask you, what in God's name, where the Patriots would be right now if John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan had thought, why don't we take just Mac Jones at 3? Or if the Carolina Panthers decided that. Or if the Bears decided that. And the Patriots either had Justin Fields or Trey Lance. Guys who are certainly nowhere near as adept at reading defenses, nor not a lot of guys are as adept as leaders as Mac Jones happens to be. I mean, the Patriots were infinitely fortunate, weren't they?
No doubt. And I think you'd probably, I don't want to say you would certainly be with Davis Mills, who I think they did like in that draft. The reason I say you wouldn't necessarily certainly be with him is because there has been some quarterback movement. And if they didn't get Mac Jones, would they have figured out a way to get Russell Wilson or pry Jalen Hurts from the Philadelphia Eagles, or, somehow try to land one of these competent veteran quarterbacks? But I guess, Tom, at the same time, I have to say, well, maybe there's a chance too. The best option for them was Mitchell Trubisky. And then
I was banging that drum momentarily.
Or Marcus Mariota, who was my guy for a while. Where would they be if those were the options they were left with? So
would they be now trying to persuade Jimmy and the 49ers to trade him back here? I mean, all those things would be in play. Of all the particular things, when you threw up those cards in the air and decided which one was going to come down in your favor, the one that worked out, that could have been the best, worked out the best for them. The only guy off the table would be Trevor Lawrence. They could have had Baker Mayfield. They could have had Jacoby Brissett. They could have been sitting here staring at Jimmy Garoppolo or Trey Lance or Justin Fields. They're so friggin' lucky they ended up with Mac Jones.
Can I ask you something? Do you think there's almost too much on his plate right now? Because when you look at it, I'm not saying he's not handling it well, everything that he's been given, but he's expected to be one of the leaders on this offense right there with David Andrews. And really after those two, I'm not sure what they have in terms of leadership. And then if you look at it big picture team-wise, Tom, and I've just had some conversations with people who know this organization very well, who look at the roster and they say, it's been a long time since Bill Belichick hasn't had the better part of, I don't know, a dozen or more than that, really core guys who know what it takes to win a championship. And now if you go through the Patriots roster right now, I think they do have about a dozen who have won a championship, whether here or at other places. But you wouldn't necessarily consider them all leaders. Like, Joe Cardona's won a championship. I think he's a
Yep.
leader in his own way, but he's the long snapper. Um,
Andrews,
well,
Trent
David
Brown,
Andrews,
maybe.
I would say, is Trent Brown a leader for this team? I would say I don't think so.
It's
Jalen Mills
Devin
won
and Slater.
Jalen Mills and Nelson Aguilar won one with the Eagles. Are they leaders of this defense? Slater for sure, McCourty for sure. I would even say John Jones. He's won a championship
Mhm.
here. He knows what it takes. It does feel like for a long, long time they had middle management that always did the right thing, that knew what it took, whether it was Edelman or Wilfork or Hightower or Van Noy or Ninkovich, or there's a million names you could go. James White is gone now. Even just thinking of the roster last year to this year, Hightower, Van Noy, White, really key guys that have seen a lot of winning football that are gone now. And now you're looking to Mac Jones to be one of your 3 or 4 best leaders. And it's a lot for a second-year quarterback.
That brings me to a transition I want to make to another conversation, and that's about patience. And Mac Jones had a little bit to say about that as well. And I think patience is really the buzzword for 2022. Here's Mac after practice on Wednesday talking about the need for patience.
We've done it in multiple ways. It's just finding it in the game and finding our rhythm, and that's going to just happen over time. And it's a long season, and we're not really worried about the future. I think Coach Belichick's laid it out for us that we're going to focus on, all right, how can we just play better? How can we just fundamentally be better? Like for me, just throw to the open guy, wherever that may be. It could be deep, short, in the middle. It doesn't really matter. And for the offensive line, pad level, and things like that. So it's a lot of fundamental stuff that if you just fix those, it really doesn't matter what you do, X's and O's wise. You should be able to compete with the players that we have and all the talent that we have.
The Patriots are going to have to endure. Now, if you had a fleet of players who had prior knowledge of how rocky a road it can be to get from the beginning of the year to the middle of the year to the end of the year, and how much blind faith you have to place in Bill Belichick, it would be different. But for this year's team, with all that turnover, and looking at an offensive coordinator who's never offensive coordinated or called plays, looking at an offensive line coach in Patricia who's splitting his time with Billy Yates, or looking at a quarterback's coach who's never been a quarterback's coach, or position coaches who look like they just graduated and are in their first year selling insurance in some cases. Certainly you get your Mayos and your Troy Browns who have a lot of cachet, but there is patience that's necessary for those players who've never been on the road before and start to say, are we there yet? Are we there yet? Because I didn't think it was going to take this long for it to look good. Does it always take this long? And I think that some of the players could, if they were here in 2014, say, yeah, sometimes it takes a shit ton of time. Sometimes it looks really bad too. You'd be surprised. They don't have that many of those guys. So there's patience on the part of the players that needs to be there. There's patience on the part of the coaches that need to be there, that don't start saying, this isn't working. Should we do something else, Bill? Patience on the part of ownership. Patience needed on the part of fans. Patience is the biggest necessity that they have this year, isn't it?
It is, and it's a great point to have those guys who understand that it doesn't always look good this time of year. Has to be incredibly valuable. And I think that's what some of these guys were getting at this week when they talked to us about championship football. And again, we talked about this, I think, earlier in the summer when guys like Jalen Mills and Adrian Phillips talked to us about how we want to play championship defense. This is what championship defense has to look like. And I'm not sitting there, Tom, I'm looking at Phillips, who I like. I think he's a good player. He's a good veteran. I think he's a good example for younger guys. But does he know what championship defense looks like? But now I hear it this week from Devin McCourty and David Andrews. They're talking more broadly about the team building process and the team coalescing this time of year. You go on the road, you have a hot practice, you come back the next day, another hot practice against a good team, then you have to follow it up with another team. These are how teams are built. These are how championship teams are built. That's essentially the message that was shared with us. And for those guys to still be around is great. and again, very valuable, but they're just not there in the same numbers they were before. And so you wonder if the message just trickles down to everybody, to the 53rd man, the same way that it did for a number of years here.
I feel like Friday night is a big game for them. You know, you had one overall, what sounded like a D practice, even though they closed well. And you have a B+, A- practice on Wednesday. But the Patriots are 16 days out from their opener, September 11th. So I look at this as an important practice. They're going to come back. Doors are going to be closed. We're not going to see them. They'll be in full game plan mode for the Miami Dolphins. But there are jobs to be won, cases to be made, and tweaks to be made, because this is the last real-time game situation where you get to see guys react on the fly. Do you think it's an important game? Because I do.
I do, because of the reasons you mentioned, where the reps against good competition are so limited between now and that first game, and because you need those reps. But I also look at this game, Tom, with the same idea that has been in the back of my head for the last 2 days here in Vegas, which is, how much are these teams really showing each other anyway? Because they have to play in December. And it's not typical that we see joint practices against a team that the Patriots are going to see later that year. And even though they're already really familiar with each other and their schemes, we know that, I think the last 2 days have been pretty vanilla. And so while it was great for the Patriots offense to string a bunch of stuff together, I'm not sure how many different defensive looks, for instance, they got from Patrick Graham and Josh McDaniels. I'm not sure how many blitzes the Raiders sent. I couldn't tell from where we were sitting, but it didn't look like all that many. And so do they finally see that in the preseason game? I kind of doubt it, because if you didn't want to show the Patriots during joint practices, you sure as hell don't want to show the rest of your competition during a preseason game, which is televised, and then the film is sent across the league. So I do think we have to have that idea in mind as we talk about this week in general, which is good week of work, good progress from the Patriots, still very, very different from what they're going to see week one against the Miami Dolphins. So hard to come away with broad strokes in terms of what things will look like when it actually matters.
All right. Well, with all that in mind, then let's move to the game and go rapid fire. 3 things each, Phil. We're going to zing and zang, ding and dong on what we'd like to see and what we're intrigued by going into this game. And I'm going to start it off. Kendrick Bourne. Again, we are a nation away from what's been going on in Vegas out here in Massachusetts, but sounded like he picked things up a little bit. Love to see that happen again, so that ridiculousness of last week becomes a thing of the past. What have you seen from him this week, and do you echo that?
So he was the one who finished off the 2-minute drill on Tuesday with a touchdown and a big spike from Mac Jones. So I think he grew a little bit. I think he came on a little bit this week. He's helped by the fact that Tyquan Thornton's not available. He was helped on Wednesday by the fact that Nelson Aguilar wasn't available for basically half the practice. So he's going to have to play, Tom. Whether it's preseason or regular season, the depth in the receiver room that was keeping him from participating more extensively in these practices has suddenly become not so deep. And so he's been better this week than he was the rest of the summer.
What do you got? What do you get your first one here?
I'm going to be looking for just some participation from some of these guys, because as good as Wednesday's practice was, it was really the first practice of the entire summer where injuries were part of the story. You lost Isaiah Wynn halfway through the practice, left and come back. Nelson Aguilar, same deal. Damian Harris left early in the practice, and we didn't even see him again. We did see that he was part of that trip to the UFC headquarters that the Patriots took later in the day. But Aguilar and Wynn came back to the sidelines and at least watched the rest of practice, which Harris did not. So if the starters are out there, are these guys playing? If they're playing, how do they look? So that to me is one. It's just the participation of some of these guys who've been banged up.
I'm going to be keying in too, as you have been, and doing a great job of chronicling at the offensive line. Max Crosby, Chandler Jones. We'll see how much those starters for Vegas play. but the depth of the offensive line, the peekaboo participation for Isaiah Wynn, Trent Brown down last week and having a down week reportedly, just in general. So how does the offensive line shake out? Who participates and how do they look? Because that has been, if we had to pin it down to one thing, narrow focus, it's the offensive line that has been maybe what's held them back more than anything.
It's been the issue, in my opinion. And I think you're right to focus on the depth there too, because if Wynn doesn't play, for example, you're going to see, I think, Justin Herron at right tackle. I think he's had a really rough summer. I think the Patriots have wanted him to show that he can play and play at a starter level in case they do find a taker for Isaiah Wynn in a trade. And they've been shopping him, according to our buddy Albert Breer. But he has not played at a starter level, in my opinion. So if he's out there and he sees Max Crosby, can he win his fair share of battles? So that's one definitely worth keying in on. I'll stick on the offensive side, Tom, and I'll just say, can the running game do anything? Because it's another big picture sort of takeaway from these practices. Day one of the practice, I thought the running game was a real focus. The first team offense only played 18 competitive snaps in 11 on 11. And almost half of those, 8 of those, were run plays. 7 of those 8 plays, though, got stuffed at the line of scrimmage or behind it. So you're talking about almost half of your snaps being failures because you just tried to run the ball. So they couldn't show anything in that regard on day one. And then on day 2, the run game was really not in focus at all. It was hurry up and it was red zone passing. That was almost the entire day. 30 some odd reps of first team offense. So the run game needs to show me something because it has not been there really all summer. And they're trying to work in these new concepts. I've been told time and again, still, even this week, even as I think we've seen less of it, this year's offense includes more zone runs, much more. So inside, outside zone, that's what they're trying. That's part of the change this year going into 2022. It hasn't taken just yet. So they have to show that, in my opinion.
And the guy who's going to be calling those plays, this is my final one. Will it be Matt Patricia? First week, it was divvied up between Patricia and Joe Judge. Joe Judge getting the majority. Last week was almost all Patricia. There's some Belichick sprinkled in there. It's hard to divine when he's doing it and when he's not. But you can't reasonably have a play caller for 2+ games of the preseason and then week 1 against Miami say, well, surprise, Matt Slater's our play caller. So if we see Matt Patricia calling the plays with the menu up on his face, then we're going to guess that Matt Patricia's your guy.
That's a good one. My last one will be on the defensive side, and this might not be fair to this guy because the guy he's going to see potentially is the best receiver in the NFL. But can Jalen Mills win and not implode against one of the best receivers in the NFL? Because he's been their best corner this year. I called him the MVP of camp when Patriots camp officially ended last week. He was my MVP with good reason, I think. And he bounced back from a rough Tuesday with a very good Wednesday. First rep of one-on-ones. He's batting away a pass intended for Davante Adams in the red zone. Can he do that in a game situation? Because he's going to see, if he's their top guy in man-to-man situations, he's going to see not Davante Adams every week, Tom, but he's going to see Pro Bowl caliber receivers probably every week. And is he up to that task? I think, under the lights, if it's just a couple series even, Derek Carr loves Davante Adams so much and he targets him so frequently. I think he'll have a couple of opportunities to show that he can stick with him or not.
All right, Phil. Appreciate it. I think that puts a bow on this thing. 25 minutes of twisted steel and sex appeal. I think we had a lot of fun. You had a nice time out there, or are you ready to come home?
I'm having a great time. I'm trying to stay on East Coast time, Tom. It's been really interesting. So I'm up at like 5 a.m. I'm not usually that guy back at home. No. But I've got a couple hours to kind of get my day straight. I'm, get a workout in, have a coffee. It feels like, this is probably what successful people do in general. And maybe I should try to adopt that lifestyle when I return home, even though I'm sure I will not.
I'm reading a book right now. It's called Why We Sleep. I would love to start going to bed at 9 on the daily, but I don't. It's 12:30. It's 1 o'clock. It's read
right
when
there
I
with
get
you.
to bed and then try and get up at 8:30. Just go
It's
to bed.
hard, though.
Just go to bed at 9:30.
It's hard, though. If you're on
we work
BST,
later.
yeah, you're working until 11 o'clock at night.
Yeah, it's because of the TV. And then you come home and you eat after TV. It's 9:15. Then you want to digest. Like, it's not a hard job, folks. I mean, it's a hard job. There's a lot to do, but it's not like we're, spraying lawns out here, which I used to do. We're working for the Milton DPW, which Phil
Yeah,
used to do.
we're certainly not weed whacking. We're
But
certainly
it's
not
just-
doing
it's
any
just-
of that.
It's a long day. You need some wind down time. Anyway, we will be back after the game tomorrow night. Look for us Saturday morning because it's gonna be a little bit late. We don't want Skull Crusher staying up all night. He's gonna have himself a Saturday. So look for our post-game pod, your quick and dirty summary of everything that happened out in Vegas. Phil, thanks for jumping on, buddy.
Anytime. Love you. Mean it. Talk to you soon.
Bye.